and documenter for Lightning Rod, a trans-led arts organism, and the gallery assistant at All My Relations Arts. Juleana has curated 3 art exhibitions, including Soft Boundaries, which explored how the vulnerable narrative can be used as an act of resistance, liberation, and healing, and their current exhibit, Biskaabiiyang, Returning to Ourselves. Juleana is a co-curator and co-founder of the multi-sensory queer dance and performance night Feels Worldwide. In 2020, they were a participating artist in Controlled Burn at the Phoenix Theater, where they exhibited To Wash the Native Out of Us, an audio-visual installation on the history of Indian boarding schools. Juleana is a recipient of the Emerging Curators Institute 2020-2021 Fellowship Program, through which they curated Biskaabiiyang, a group exhibition investigating Indigenous Futurisms and the interconnectivity of nows. Through their practice, Juleana strives to examine the act of daily creation in the midst of great chaos and explore what it means to be a contemporary two-spirit artist with focus on decolonization and reclaiming Native joy through art and performance. So welcome, Juleana. Go ahead, take it over.
Gwech, Angela, Bonjour, Tayanga Hippie. Welcome everyone to Fluid Futurism, a curator-to-curator conversation on Indigenous Futurisms as it relates to two-spirit Indigiqueer artists. First, I just want to take some time to show gratitude for our ancestors and those who have come before us. I'm moderating this residing in Minnesota, the traditional land of the Dakota people, and we honor them in past, present, and future. I'd like to welcome our panelists, Adrienne Huard and Coyote Park. It's an honor and a pleasure to share a virtual space with you. I'll be opening up the conversation for questions from the audience at the end of the discussion, so feel free to drop those in the chat as they come up, and I'll relay them to our guests at the end. I'll also be dropping some links to projects in the chat from Adrienne and Coyote, so be sure to check these out. And then a little bit about our panelists. Adrienne Huard, they, them, is a two-spirit Indigiqueer Anishinaabe curator, writer, scholar, and performer. They are a citizen of Cowichan First Nation, Ontario, and born and raised in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. They're a former editor-at-large at national arts publication Canadian Art Magazine and are co-founder of Indigiqueer curatorial collective alongside their collaborator, Jas M. Morgan. Currently, they're enrolled in the PhD level program in Indigenous Studies at the University of Manitoba. Coyote Park, they, is a two-spirit Korean-German Yurok Native artist from Honolulu, Hawaii, that currently lives in Tongva Territory, Los Angeles. They're a photographer and storyteller who is Indigenous to the Calumet River in North California. Park collaborates on images with their trans family as they want to make images of people that they love and have shared lived experiences with. Park's work aims to create queer utopia by photographing spaces of comfort, togetherness, and liberation. Park merges their written work with their passion for image making and has been working on a photo book entitled All Kin is Bloodkin from 2020 to current, surrounding themes of family, rebirth, bodies, sexuality, and love. Park curated and edited a QT BIPOC dream anthology with gender fail, full of dream medicine called Beyond Shut Eyes in 2021. And their painting practice is made up of land-body relationships with the land merging into the form of a body. In Yurok, there's no word for nature because we are nature. So their art takes on a literal approach to this connection. Park has been working on their personal collection of poems and short essays called Sejip-Pikoyek, Two-Spirit Testimonies of Love and Life, Sejip-Pikoyek, translating to Coyote Blood. One of their most major artistic works that they're collaborating on with their wife, T. Park, is a short film entitled Destiny in Sedona, a non-monogamous love story film of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that centers a two-spirit, intersex, non-binary, and trans cast. Their work is a pathway to healing and dreaming up new worlds. Pila Maya for being here. I'll give you a moment to say hello to our audience and to each other, and then I'll jump into some questions about your work.
Do you want to go first, Coyote? Oh, geez. Okay. Yeah, Buju and Dinwe Magana Dog, Nin, Dibikiki Siswabukunikwe Indigenous Cause, Mikinakin Dodem, Gojijing and Dunchaba, Nisquagami Witsibing and Dao. Hello, I'm Adrienne. That was just a typical Anishinaabe protocol where we introduce ourselves. And yeah, I'm just really happy to be here. And I'm currently residing in Winnipeg, Manitoba on Treaty 1 territory. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Ayukui, my name is Coyote Park. I am in Tongva territory in downtown Los Angeles, Tobangar. I'm excited to have this discussion today with some of my loves here, with my extended relatives, and yeah, I don't know. I go by here, they, and also just in terms of my name, it just translates to Sigip in Europe.
Which I'm just going to start with Adrienne first. So you're the former editor-at-large at the now defunct Canadian art magazine, which is where I became familiar with your writings. So I'm wondering what led you to that space and what you wanted to see from that publication in terms of representation.
Yeah, I was approached by them back in, I believe it was 2016, to write a review of the National Gallery, because they had revamped their Indigenous and Canadian gallery space. And so that is kind of one of my first experiences, doing a very involved writing, and one of the bigger names that I had actually written for. So it was a big part of my career. And then, further down the road, I'd worked with them just as a freelance writer here and there, but it's actually my co-curator of my curatorial collective, or our curatorial collective, I should say, Yaz and Morgan. And so they worked at the magazine for 3 years, I guess. And when it was their time to move on, they had, brought the information forward that they were looking for an Indigenous editor and writer. And so in a way, working with Yaz had really set up a precedent for me, and they really paved the way. And so it's funny how Two-Spirit and queer Indigenous people, we almost find ways to mentor each other when there are people who, when there's almost a deficit of queer Indigenous mentorship. At least in my experience, there has been. So it is, it's kind of really beautiful relationship that we've garnered because of through that. And so yeah, I've learned a lot through Yaz and just through that. So yeah. Oh, and what I'd like to see for representation. Sorry, forgot about that part. Yeah, it was really sad to see the magazine go, but I worked alongside Ozzy Michelin, who's an Inuk writer and producer, and they're just amazing. So they hired the two of us together, knowing that, retention is really important. So if you hire 2 Indigenous people instead of just one, you kind of share these, you share a care for each other going through these institutional spaces. But we worked alongside each other, and we did quite a few projects together. But yeah, I don't know, I guess we'll see what happens next in terms of the Canadian art realm after this magazine had kind of gone under, I guess.
Yeah, you just mentioned care, and that kind of leads me into my next question. I really love what you've said about enacting community care and kinship in your curatorial practice. And Coyote, I know that cultivating community and kinship is also at the heart of your work. Can you both speak more on what enacting community care and consensual reciprocity looks like for you?
I feel in all of the work that I do with facilitating events or creating larger projects or working just with different artists is like a very for us by us mentality. Always like creating from a place of what is it that we want to be seeing, really leaning into that. It's like really especially breaking down those like hierarchies of you know, oh, I'm the one like organizing this and you're an artist that's like working for me. I think really breaking down those distinctions or roles, but seeing it more as like, what we all bring to the table, especially the way that community care looks like, creating spaces that we want to see ourselves in, that we haven't seen, that we haven't felt. So that's like physical, online spaces. I feel like, especially during the pandemic, I've just organized so many online spaces. But really, like, how do we dream up these future worlds in a way that feels like we aren't continuing the same like oppressions that we've experienced? Also thinking about reciprocity as like an act of gift giving and exchange. How do we value what others have to share, and how do we honor the presence of one another? I feel like that's something that I experienced the most when, like, even just recently I went to my like wife's like screening for her film, and just having other like two-spirit like relatives of mine come and like bring like medicine bundles that they grew as like a way of like showing care for the work that she's done. That was something that was really special, meaningful for like to me to be able to experience, is just the fact that like we're all really not only celebrating each other's like just like projects or art or like creations, but we're seeing it constantly in exchange and constantly in care of one another.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when I think about community, or when I think about kinship, I think about, like my curatorial projects, or even, collaborative artworks that I've done. And I can't imagine curating any more projects alone, or even, co-authoring things. Like, I feel like in this Western world, it's so like individualistic and it's so isolating. And I find that the best projects, or the best things that have actually meant care, and for me, that is like survival, because I see other people that are like me. And so why wouldn't we band together and find ways? Because also, like, two-spirit people and queer Indigenous people, like, we're not a monolith, right? We're so diverse. We have so many different experiences. So like coming together and working together and collaborating is such an important part of like the work that I do. And even since the pandemic, like, it's been very difficult. In Coyote, I've been seeing the work that you do like online. It's like chef's kiss. It's so good, and it takes a lot to organize in an online digital space. So yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, I see both of your online presence is just it's so community based, it's so interactive, and I think it really shows how genuine your desire for that kinship, and for that that reciprocity and that building up of other people is. So it's beautiful. Coyote, I wanted to lean over to you for a second. You recently teamed up with trans non-binary publishing platform Genderflail to edit a QT BIPOC dream anthology series, Behind Shut Eyes. So I'm curious how you got involved with that project, and also your take on radical softness and dream medicine as it relates to this body of work.
Yeah, I actually ended up doing an open call for submissions for writing about like 2 years ago, almost like 3 years ago now. And that was something that as soon as I've really assembled like a lot of pieces and got into communication with so many different artists, that's kind of later on down the road that I reached out to be at Genderfail. And B's like worked a lot with Rin before, who is someone that was actually the first person I reached out to before I even did an open call. They actually did the graphics for the open call. Rin Kim Ni is a Korean and trans graphic designer and is someone that I've worked on a queer Korean zine with before, and is someone I've just like I'm involved in their like future publications for Future Pleasures, which is their it's like a cutie BIPOC fantasy mythology folklore based anthology. And I started with the need for like dream medicine. I feel like that's something that I would always, every time I see like friends will like be reflecting on our dream states. And for myself, like growing up, I had like just, and even still not as much as when I was younger, but have the most like vivid sleep paralysis states. And I think that that's a common experience for a lot of Indigiqueer and Two-Spirit folks, is like the ways that we're really, really in touch with the world and like the astral realm and everything. So I would just have these experiences where I'm like, this isn't the first time I've lived this, and then like relating it back to dreamscapes I've had. And then also hearing from different friends that are like Black natives, Afro-Indigenous friends of mine, like other like queer Asian friends, especially in like Korean culture. That's something that in like my culture we have just so many different ways of processing different symbols and dreams. So I really wanted to I was really inspired by the Nepantla, the queer poets of color anthology, and wanting something like that. I was like, okay, I love this. There's not really a lot of like as much trans authors in that. And I was like, I want to like really uplift more like trans writers in this. And I really wanted something that was off of like a theme that like can go so many different places. So that's what I really started that from, was from a place of like, what is something that feels like necessity in processing the world we live in and the worlds that we live in, but that everyone can kind of make as their own. And I feel like I was a whole other person when I started Behind Shut Eyes, even though it was like a few years ago. I just had the same aspirations for it. So I feel like I've been through all these like death and rebirths while making that. But even the naming of the zine was chosen by all the artists. We did like community prompts and meetings. So that was something where I would do Zoom calls where I would start off of being like, what is a food that reminds you of home? Or I would just kind of have these different, all throughout the quarantine, did like a year and a half of just like all these different Zoom calls with everyone, where it was more of building community than like, here, you submitted your work, now like I'll reach out to you when it's printed. It was like really building family. I wanted to create a social and emotional space for all of the artists. And really, it was the most rewarding thing to see people come out with new friendships and new chosen family. And I kept sending emails where I'm like, okay, it seems kind of intensive to meet up this often, but it's all optional. Like, it was very much if people just wanted that space to like hear what other people have been writing, or to for me just to like really dive deep into what the zine was going to look like. But really prioritizing the intros. Like, we would always, I think the last prompt we had was, if you could live on like any planet, like what would you live on? And like, what would you, and some people, it would be like these fictional like planets they read in books, or people being like Pluto because it's still a planet, and then other people would be like honestly Earth because we need to take care of her. And so yeah, it was just a project that really put so much of my heart in, but also seeing everyone else's like really wanting to hold that with so much care, because my dreamscapes are so connected to like ancestral medicine and so related to how I heal through like my own intergenerational traumas and where I'm at now. And so wanting to hold that with the same respect for others.
Yeah, one, sleep paralysis is real. And yeah, I got my copy of this book a few weeks back now. And I mean, you can really tell how much care that you as an editor and curator put into this body of work. It flows so well, and it's such a beautiful anthology. Highly recommend it to people. I dropped a little link in the chat. Adrienne, you curated your first program of queer Indigenous Two-Spirit short films titled Kinship and Closeness, co-presented by Indigiqueer.ca, which toured extensively across Canada and screened at the Toronto Queer Film Festival in 2018. Can you speak more on how these works encourage a queering of time through an Indigenous lens and allow for a nonlinear perception of time?
Yeah, definitely. As I just choked on my water, did you see that? Okay. Yeah, that was like my first experience really curating anything that was film based. And that was, gosh, like, yeah, it was that was a minute ago. It feels like yesterday and forever, but which I guess brings up nonlinear time. But what was really beautiful about many of these films is that, you know, they took place, or they were released in the 90s, they were released recently, but it was almost like the films themselves were timeless alone. You know, it was, it really made me think about Indigenous storytelling, and specifically Anishinaabe storytelling, where, you know, I've heard through circles and through my elders and through my ceremonial family is that, you know, like our stories don't really have a beginning and they never really end. You know, it's like a cyclical type of time. And so I think about this dissolution of like Western time, which is like, you know, this happened then this, and then that, you know what I mean? And but for us, it's like, yeah, it's like there's really no beginning, there's no end. I don't know how else to put it in this way. And so I kind of just wanted to you know, to kind of embody that in a way, or to show that. And you know, I think about, I've been looking a lot at Indigenous you know, ideas of time, and or Indigenous, I shouldn't say ideas, knowledges regarding time. And you know, it's interesting to hear like the work of, say, Suzanne Kite, where she talks about, you know, this kind of like ancestral memory, or how it's like almost like cones, and then coming out this other end, or how like, you know, we could actually exist, or how it's like quite miraculous that we are actually meeting right now in this moment of time, right? Like everything is just so amazing. I'm kind of in awe of just how time works. And yeah, so then when I think about kinship and closeness too, you know, I also wanted to give a nod to the people who have really paved the way for queer and two-spirit Indigenous artists and filmmakers and creators, and just people in general, because, you know, without them, we would not have, I mean, as much as our freedoms are limited as queer and two-spirit people, but, you know, there's also, you know, elements of like, you know, being cis presenting or cisgendered, right? Or Afro-Indigenous, there's colorism, there's ableism, right? And so, but when I say freedoms, I say like the ability for us to gather in this way as queer Indigenous people. Like we're quite yeah, I just think we should give a nod to the people who've come before us, and that, it's yeah, I don't know. And I guess that's what I was looking for, and kind of like an amalgamation of emerging and of maybe more established artists and mid-career, and yeah, I kind of just did this sort of thing with time that was really beautiful and fun.
I love that. Yeah, I think about that nonlinear aspect of time often, and it was definitely something that I was thinking about in biskaabiiyang, especially in terms of Indigenous futurism and science fiction. There's definitely these secular, like you said, patterns between past, present, and future, where if you look at them beyond a lens of a Western colonized kind of way, there's not really a stopping point or an end point. It's just all kind of connected in this beautiful way. Is there a place that people can view these films now?
You know what? I don't think so. You know what? I'd have to touch base with them. I know that it was presented by Media Queer, so it's certainly within their archives, but yeah, it's something I'd have to come back to. I can't even remember. I guess one other thing I wanted to talk about super briefly is that I forgot to mention with like storytelling as well, is like I often think like when you hear stories or you hear teachings, you're like, oh yeah, way back in the past, right? But it could have been yesterday and it could be tomorrow. Like that's kind of the beauty of a lot of our teachings. So then I guess like nonlinear time is a really beautiful, or that's kind of a good example of nonlinear time, right? Anyway, I could go on.
And another Zoom webinar just on that. Coyote, going back to your bio, I am really interested in this concept that you mentioned about creating queer utopia. In your photography series, All Kin is Blood Kin, you explore intimate spaces of comfort, togetherness, and liberation with your trans and queer community. I'm wondering how you see this fitting into documentation towards evidence of existence, and also about the elements of joy in this work.
Yeah, I feel like it's a loaded question. I think that where I'm at now in life, it's something that is the most needed it's ever been, especially off of like I don't know, I have my father blocked on my phone, and he's someone who he's Yurok, and his mom is from the Klamath, and like my grandma, and because I'm not in communication with him, really losing connection to her, and how much that like hurts regularly within familial kinship systems, but even more like culturally. And so where I'm at and the work for All Kin is Blood Kin, it really does come from this way that trans, and I know that earlier Adrienne was talking about survival. I feel like chosen family has always been about survival, and more so in my life now than ever, especially with like my partnerships. And I think I really needed to find hope through this series. So in creating evidence of existence and joy, it's I always talk to my partner about how cheesy sometimes it feels of the like trope of, oh, I'm making for my younger self, which like, yes, true, I am, and both of us are essentially, but I feel like not only into my past self, but this like very, very strong like desire that comes from like that younger voice in me that didn't think that there was like space in this world for someone like me that's two-spirit, being like someone outside of a colonial gender system, being someone who's really gay. And on top of that, having multiple like different types of love partnerships. It's just let alone get into race and ethnicity for me. So it was just in a place where feeling always like the black sheep in my own family, and then being like, what if I bring like work into this world that feels like we can be like a whole herd of black sheeps together, like a whole family of that, because I don't know, and just knowing that I'm not cut off, even if I'm maybe cut off communication wise to my father, I'm not cut off to my elders that are like non-judgmental over myself. So a lot of the work in Alkinizbliken has been paying homage to my like nana who passed away, whose family immigrated from Korea. And it's like all these images, not only of the love and partnerships and friendships that I wish I could have seen at different points in my life, where I was like, I can't have that, someone like me can't have that. It's also photographs of like my altar space, and it's photographs of like my wife's grandma sent us from Korea these protection it's basically like prayer papers that you put on your door, like to protect the house, like detailed shots of that. And all of those images come together to show evidence of not only like existence, joy, but more of like a resistance, like a really strong voice in me that's like, I'm tired of thinking that there's not enough in this world for me, or coming from a place of scarcity, but like I'm making that with the people that I love. I'm making that every day, and just waking up with a different mentality, you know. Yeah.
I love that. I didn't ask you this before, but do you mind if I drop that linked from your website into the chat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, that's from the digital exhibition that you can share. That was all something, because I'm always thinking about like accessibility, and the opening show for Alkinizbliken, when I did my first like solo gallery show of that work, which is very curated towards being based in the Kingdom of Hawaii, which is where I grew up. But that work is like the digital curated show is so that I can like reach other like trans people that want to see it.
Yeah, it's so beautiful, and it's one of the first discoveries I made of your work, and I think it was just so telling into like the kind of artist that you are, and the kind of like intimacy that you want to create and showcase. And yeah, it filled me with all of the feels. So thank you for sharing that. Adrienne, I want to go back to you for a second. In your body of writing, The Land is Liminal, you speak about how the land teaches us about fluidity, that it doesn't operate under binary thinking, and how this relates to conversations around gender, sexuality, and sexual agency for Indigenous peoples. Can you expand more on reclaiming and honoring our sexual autonomy beyond settler colonial ideologies?
Yeah, that's a good question. I first of all want to acknowledge that there are so many people who have writing, or who are thinkers, and have have expressed deeply this idea of our sexualities or genders very much mirroring the land, and fluidity and motion and time. And so yeah, I think a lot about Regan de Logans, and also Yaz M. Morgan, and Billy Ray Belcourt, and so and Ariel Twist. But pardon me. Yeah, so when I think about like reclaiming my sexuality or my body autonomy, I very much think about my pole dancing practice, and Yeah, I mean, for me, it very much reflects, this kind of agency and also this like self-expression that I think a lot of Indigenous folks, we feel this sort of this weight of guilt and shame that is brought on by, Christian missionaries that have, and obviously the residential school system and just the imposition of Christianity in general. Like, so I guess in a way, it's kind of like pushing against that and not demonstrating that kind of shame, and instead very much embracing a body that we were almost believed was, that we were basically told to hate in some ways, right? And so I often think about this like disconnect of spirit, body, mind, heart, for Indigenous folks, especially, and how, since residential schools and being placed on the with the reservation system and all this stuff, and even looking 60 scoop here in Canada, though I'm sure it does trickle down into the States, of course. But I think about a body that has never really felt like ours, and so how do we come back to ourselves? And when I think about actually the title of your exhibition, Juleana, biskaabiiyang, right? It's returning, it's coming back to ourselves, right? And that's very much I don't want to say methodology, it sounds so dry. It's a way of thinking that I really like to embody and reclaim. So yeah, I guess that's it.
I think I'm going to jump down to a question I was going to ask later, but I feel like it really kind of relates. Both of you were featured in Asher Pangir's podcast series, Living in This Queer Body, which is a podcast about the barriers to embodiment and how our collective body stories can bring us back to ourselves. Was there anything that you discovered during that discourse that relates to your practice or your own body agency that you want to share?
I was gonna say that I can't imagine how it feels for Adrienne like pulling up memory from this, because yours is before mine. Like and I'm thinking back because I think we recorded the one I did in September of 2020. So a little over a year. And so even I'm trying to jog my memory of it, because like what I really love about that podcast and also sharing space with Adrienne, with being able to do that podcast, is how much like everyone's oral histories within the podcast kind of like feed into each other. And there's so many themes that I feel like are kind of being expanded upon. And I remember listening to Adrienne's on a road trip with my best friend Seema, and just listening to it together. And so it comes up with like all the sentimental stuff behind that. But yeah, in terms of like body reclamation and queerness, I feel like there's a lot of just like weird parallels around that, even when you're talking about the reclamation of performance spaces, because that's something, I don't know, I just came from doing a show I produced last night for Alejandro, which is like a two-spirit, like non-binary trans mask. It's like the sibling event to Jolene, which is the trans femme night that they do for performers and mainly like strippers, burlesque artists, due to the ways that we've been kind of like pushed out, like to say really bluntly, out of regular strip spaces or like the clubs, and having that consistent workflow, cash flow too, in terms of sustainability. But cycling it back, I was going to say that I feel like when I first listened to Adrienne's podcast and I'm thinking where I'm at now, it's really hard for me to almost jog back up my memory of my podcast, but I remember yours like way clear, because I think if I spoke again on living in this queer body, I think I would have a very different like I would still care a lot about the topics that I brought up in that one, but I think I would have so many different central themes that I would want to explore. But that's what I really love about Asher, is that like it can really go anywhere. Who's the one who organized or like conducts the oral history recordings and podcast episodes. But yeah, I don't know, just thinking about body reclamation and topics I would have talked about, but I've been thinking a lot more often is, yeah, the really fucking powerful feeling it is to perform in a space where you're like, this is all for me. Like people don't have to like my song choice. People don't have to like if I do the fanciest move versus if I'm just like giving face the whole time. And it's an act of really understanding, like, yes, it feels very rewarding when you get like a certain response, but in the end of the day, like you're just happy with the way you're being regrounded into your body, and the way that you're feeling movement and feeling like what I loved about what Adrienne wrote is like the beautiful fuck you. It definitely feels like that. It feels like a moment of like, I need to really reimagine what it means to like exist in not only with like a queer body, but with like a queer heart. And knowing this is all for me at the end of the day.
Oh, you're my heart. Yeah, I remember, I mean, speaking to like body and performance and all that, like Coyote, I remember we've been following each other on the internet and like sliding in each other's DMs for like years now, it feels like. And so, pardon me, just over the pandemic, like I remember you had a poll and we're just like, we should FaceTime and do poll things together. And I don't know, it was just like such a beautiful time. So then to see that you came out with this show that you produced last night, like, my God, it's really incredible to see that these spaces are being built and that you are creating these platforms. Like I would have sold my soul to be there. Oh my God, don't tell my ancestors. Really, but you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, it's really incredible. And that really pets my heart when you mention Asher's podcast. It's been like, I feel the same way. Like it's been a couple years since that one came out. And I can't even remember some of the things that I said, but I do remember this like connection of you know, I don't know, I guess of just also having a twin who you know, she also identifies as queer, and kind of like seeing someone growing up in kind of this mirror image, and how fascinating and interesting it is. And but the first time, this is like, I'm just going all over the place, but the first time I had actually performed in a completely two-spirit safer space. No space is ever safe, unfortunately, is what I'm learning. But it was when I performed last year, or the year before that, last year, gosh, pandemic times. I was invited to perform alongside a two-spirit drag collective here in Winnipeg called Bannock Babes. And so they kind of had me as this guest, as like a pole dancer, and then they forgot to install the pole, so I ended up just doing a lap dance on Local Honey, is one of the drag folks. Anyway, long story short is that, you know, I realized that coming back to Winnipeg, I moved away for quite a while, and coming back to this space is that, you know, we very much exist, and how absolutely detrimental it is to have these spaces, because they're few and far between, unfortunately, you know. And you know, I'm kind of seeing like little bits of it now. Like I'm a pole instructor now. I'm very much about acknowledging, you know, as someone who has a former or background in stripping and sex work and all that fun stuff, but also acknowledging where pole dance comes from. And, you know, from say like from the culture that we know now, Black strippers in Harlem going to Atlanta and then also San Francisco, right? And so that's very much a part of my discourse. It's what I teach in my classes on top of teaching people body autonomy. And it's a really cool thing to see that there are like Indigenous people and queer Indigenous people slowly trickling into my classes. Like, it's a really beautiful thing to see. So I guess it's like one of the things that in this small prairie town is that, you know, we're slowly having that representation. And so anyway, Coyote, I would have loved to have been there last night. It sounds so incredible. And you're
I know,
doing
I was like
amazing
DMing
work.
you, being like, any chance you are in LA? I
I was like,
always like
oh man.
just put it out there just in case. But yeah, it felt very like feels very full circle moment to have even DMing you, be like, hee, can I send you videos I recorded of myself practicing? Just because I think what's really nice, even talking earlier about breaking down hierarchies as like an organizer, or when you're doing any type of collective art space with people, is knowing we're never the masters or experts of anything. And I'm like literally still the most baby beginner at pole. And which is what I love about the night space I was organizing, where I was having dancers that like didn't like do any pole, people that were go-go dancers, people that were just like anything where you're doing like, you know, really using like the power of the erotic and sensuality. And so yeah, I don't know, that was something where I know that there was a lot of people that were so nervous about like, because we had like access to a free pole class, and I was like telling people, like, you should come. And people were like, oh, I've never been on a pole before, like different things like that. And I was like, don't worry, you'll see me, I'm like know the babyest tricks. But it's just how you sell it. Anyways,
I've seen you spin.
oh my god, no.
Stop being so humble. I've seen it.
But I think that's something that like I want to see more in like curating, or I want to see more in different organizing, is ways that people can like really build more spaces of like comfort and ease for where anyone's at, and also letting people know that like, also like going back to the gift giving thing earlier, like really acknowledging what people do bring. And it's like last night there was someone who's like the most nervous, that was like, I'm so anxious about tonight. And I was like, no, you'll be so fine, like and then after the like during all their performances, like the energy they had on stage was like one of the most powerful stage presences I've ever had. Like people were like eating it up. I was like screaming like the whole time watching them. Like I was like, this is like so moving. And just thinking that like afterwards, like talk to them, like really like reminding them of like that. I think that as like, I really hope that we continue to really honor like each other's worth, and like seeing it as like a constant energy, not like an outcome or like something like always physical. But yeah, I don't know, I was going on this whole tangent, but yeah, I still would love to have you at future shows. I also think that that's what's been really cool about the digital shows. I know that I've been seeing some Two-Spirit burlesque shows online, and I've been in the past, I did some like, I've like organized some performance spaces online too. And I think we're in the age of like media stuff where we have like streaming and everything, like the physical spaces to the like digital virtual. But yeah, I don't know, just like so many endless possibilities around that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I saw clippets of some videos and I wished I was there too. And I think, you know, like being someone who co-curates and has co-founded like a queer performance and dance night, I understand how important it is to like cultivate a space that is full of experimentation and solidarity. And yes, it's not going to be perfect. And like you said, Adrienne, it's not always going to be like, there's not always control over how safe it can be. You can take factors involved, but yeah, just being able to share space with people and feel that like experimentation together and that fear together, and like knowing that you're creating something beautiful and new and inspiring. Yeah, I love that. Coyote, wanted to talk a little bit about the work that you created for biskaabiiyang, abundance in the soil, abundance in our hands. It speaks towards a reconnection to the land and land stewardship projects. And I just want to take a minute to read a portion of your artistic statement for this piece, because not only is it beautifully poetic, but it connects so well to the topic of what Indigenous Futurisms encompass. So you say, Indigenous Futurism isn't a fever dream. It's the heat of a fever and the burning desire of our existence. As Native people, we've survived many apocalypses. We cultivate a future where our children are laughing, the water is drinkable, the plants are fruitful, and there is new growth after a forest fire. A settler colonial dream is a metal spaceship with a window that watches the burning of worlds and dystopian plague of nations. I see the future in land deeds given back to Black, Indigenous people of color that bring restoration in our care. Land back is a reality when Black and Indigenous people are the stewards and caregivers of fertile soil and protectors of mountains, streams, oceans, and all that is in beyond, between beyond. The land is calling to be placed in the hands of those that it birthed. And I love what you're getting at here by thinking of futurism as something that's currently unfolding, as motion, not a destination, but an ongoing act, a survival. And that notion that Indigenous people are living in our own post-apocalyptic world. Can you talk a little bit more about this piece and also the land stewardship projects you're involved with?
Whoa, so I've never heard my like poetry being read by someone else out loud. So I was just like, I was like, ew, I'm so gay. Okay, but yeah, I guess I'll start in terms of speaking more into land stewardship projects. I feel like I'm always resharing different funds or aids towards projects that people are currently trying to build, especially around like medicinal farms. And but recently, this past month, for Native like Heritage Month, if you go to the story highlights, there's a lot of like people that have done stories directly talking about the projects they're working on. I feel like they speak on it way better than I can. I feel like this piece really came from a place of like yearning for what a future relationship of land will be like, but also knowing that isn't something like new, and that isn't something that it's like it's more of like a return to, which like going back to like the titling of the show, and how we as like Indigenous people have always like cared for our homelands and still are. Also thinking about earlier what Adrienne was speaking on of like the nonlinear time, knowing that Indigenous futures is like unfolding. I love the word unfolding. But it's happening in current time. And I think now something that gets really, and then maybe this is just me doing really, really short existential event when talking about timescapes and like nonlinear time, and this show is the way that people have talked about like two-spirit people and Indigenous queer people as like something like now emerging, or as like, whoa, like there's so much like this is something that's like newer, like wow, it's so cool that we're having. And it's like, no, like this is literally something that was really, really like suppressed from like us and our cultures, and that we've like been doing like a return to, but has always been there. And that's something like, I don't know. Yeah, my short vent was like, I was like interviewed on like a weird, like a red carpet thing recently in Hollywood, where they're like, wow, like, how do you feel about two-spirit people all merging now? And I was like, no, like we've always been here. There's just been a really violent suppressive force that's made it feel like we can't show all of our beautiful forms. But anyways, that's my short vent, because I was thinking about like, even in this painting that I worked on for the show and thinking about like land relationships, it does have to do a lot about like body relationships. How have like we as like two-spirit people, or like also indigenous queer people, because not everyone identifies as like two-spirit, especially since people have terms within their own cultural language. Anyways, it's a side bit as well. But thinking about the land isn't separate from the body. And something I read recently and my friend posted that made me really emotional. This wasn't a direct quote from them. I don't know who originally wrote this quote, but it's very simple. So I don't know how it could be traceable in that way, but it's the land wants us back too. So just thinking about land back, but knowing that it isn't a relationship of ownership, it's a relationship of like coexistence. And yeah, I don't know. I this Even though there is very, very tangible like community land stewardship projects, I've been really dreaming up what I wish that people that do have that power and access to can like really lend over, because it's like really is like time to call in that type of action. I think that we're looking for that and like resources like in so many different places, and knowing that that's happening. And I always have people that always ask about like land back, and they're like, okay, but like how does that like tangibly look? And I'm like, just look around you, because like it's in the community farm that you see down the street. And yeah, that's kind of what a big part of like the film I'm working on with my wife right now, Destiny and Sedona, that was mentioned in the beginning intro, is all off of thinking about the land as a character on her own, and seeing love as something that is not in ownership, but is in like love and freedom, and thinking about that as a relationship too with like the physical spaces that we exist within. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering in relation to that, how for this is for both of you, how you see body and land sovereignty as a path to healing and resistance and resilience, kind of through the lens of Indigenous Futurism.
I guess I think about, that's a hard question. In terms of Indigenous futurism or Indigenous futurities, it's, I think for us paving some sort of way to ensure that our future ancestors will be safe, or that they're granted that kind of grace that we're given now, as limited as it may be, but I don't know, when I think about like futurity, I think about, there was a poem by Siku Alalu, or maybe not a poem, but a creative writing piece. And they are a Dene, oh my goodness, forgive me, Siku, Enoch or Dene writer. Anyway, they're really incredible. And they wrote this one instance where they went caribou hunting. And in that moment, they had positioned the caribou's head back on the ground after taking what they needed, and that the ears were facing forward as a way of looking forward or letting it continue its journey, so that it's like so that the people, so that it can like they can replenish and maintain their population, so that it's like guarantees that the people coming after us will have that food supply. And just I think about how diverse and distinct our ideas of futurism and our experiences are as Indigenous people and our teachings. But when I think about us specifically, it's we're perpetually thinking about how we can take care of our community members and how we can look forward so that the people coming after us can be safe and can flourish in a way, you know. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question. You give it a shot, Coyote.
Yeah, like land body relation. I've been thinking a lot about what does body reclamation look like in my everyday. A lot of therapy, a lot of therapy. I started seeing a native therapist who she's like also queer, and something I always think about in sessions with her is like, how can I heal the mothers before me? Like, how can I do that for myself? Because I FaceTime my friend today. It's a process because sometimes, at least for myself, as someone who I feel like I've been trying to go through more extensive therapy because of like past like episodes or just like you know, like emotional regulation stuff. I feel like something I was on a call with my friend. I was processing this with my friend. I was like, oh, does this like kind of getting validation for like thought processes that I'll like feel from like things happening. And then my friend was like, the body really does keep score. And I was like, yes, thank you. But I just think about that in thinking about like body sovereignty with land sovereignty. Um I think earlier we touched on it a lot with talking about like performance spaces, but I think about my body sovereignty as a two-spirit person, or like what is ways that I'm able to create the agency that those in my bloodlines they didn't have. My ancestors in Korea immigrated through sex work. And so that's something there's so much shame in the family about, that for myself I've had to like, oh my gosh, in prayer I'm literally celebrating always of like knowing that I have like bad bitches in my bloodlines that got me here. And so I don't know, and I've been thinking a lot about the ways of like body sovereignty being like the body is nowhere near severed from spirit. And I think that's something that's like a very colonial like thought process, is like, oh, the ghost, and your like ghost is so distant from your body. And but knowing that a body isn't like a one thing. And so for myself, with like my body sovereignty, it looks a lot like spirit sovereignty. And so I had like a very specific place I was going with this. I was gonna say, I feel like in taking care of like my spirit, a lot of that's recognizing this like this unquenchable thirst for different things in my bloodlines people weren't able to have because of settler colonial survival. Like my mother wanted to be a writer, and then she just ended up becoming like an English school teacher and still wants to make a book, but hasn't had that type of resource like support to create a book. And I'm here working on like my poetry anthology right now. And my father like was a painter before I don't know all of his shit. And then he joined the military, and yeah, anyways. And so, and then now where I'm able to like paint here and there, and yeah, just so many different aspects of different people in my like family that couldn't that felt like they had to give up parts of themselves. And for me, a lot of my body reclamation and spirit reclamation is like, I don't need to discard what my spirit calls me to do.
That's interesting. Oh no, sorry, go on.
Good.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, that's super interesting, because when I think about how like body and heart and spirit and all that is like intrinsically connected, I've been doing a lot of thinking about like our creation stories as the Anishinaabe people, and that you know, especially like with the help of my advisor, who is like a wealth of information. But you know, this idea of creation, there's like our first thought and then there's motion, right? Like there are the two stages of blowing into the megas, right? The shell. And so when I think about motion, I think about movement, and I often tie that with performance, because in a very profound and beautiful way, you end up almost like speaking this language that you know your ancestors can speak, or that almost is a universal language, but you get to this like spiritual level when you're performing, when you're moving, right? Like we can see it in all, like we can see it in powwow, we can see it in jigging, right? If you're busting moves to Ernest Monius, like we see it, right? So yeah, I just feel like this idea of like body, it's like you're elevating and working in motion with spirit, and it's yeah, it's really beautiful thing.
Really quickly just had just such a like, I don't know if deja vu is the right word for it, but like, I don't know, what you're talking about is so interesting. You keep bringing up the mind, body, spirit thing, because my anthology I'm working on right now is to get Pekoyek. It's broken up in mind, body, and spirit as the three parts. So the mind is a dedication to all the angels I knew, where I'm processing like mental health stuff as a two-spirit person. Then body is a section called Deadly American Blood that looks at like my family history. And then Heart of a Shapeshifter is spirit, where it talks about like my queer like relationship. Yeah, so I was just like, whoa. Which I would love to send you the PDF of the working poem. Yeah.
I love that that kismetness. I also, yeah, I just wanted to like, going back to Adrienne, what you were saying about this like draw away from individualism, that like healing ourselves is an act of healing others, and healing our ancestors, and then in turn them healing us. When I was working on my essay for the artist catalog for biskaabiiyang, I was like dually reading Walking the Clouds, the Grace Dillon's anthology of Indigenous science fiction, and reading pleasure activism. And I just found how like the connection, the connectivity between land and body sovereignty between those two books, like it just like exploded my mind. It's so, I think that you definitely need to have like, to be thinking about a reclamation of an agency of your own body until before you can like have more conversations about anything else. Yeah, I wanted to just, I have a couple more questions, but Adrienne, I wanted to go back to, you're a co-founder of Gajit, a curatorial collective based in Montreal and Toronto, concentrated on community engaged Indigenous art addressing gender, sex, and sexualities. And through that, you and Lindsay Nixon curated For Whom Masculinities Matter, which was an exhibition asking what has gone unsaid about Indian masculinities and what can radical tenderness and gender and fluid gender teach us about consciousness raised, anti-colonial, tender, Indigenous masculinities. Just wondering how that exhibition came about, and if you just could speak a little bit more on that. It's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so currently my co-curator now goes by Yaz and Morgan. I believe they changed their name last year. And so it was really Yaz who had spearheaded it, because they were doing readings on Indigenous masculinities. And, you know, we've been working with, I mean, folks obviously of all sorts of gender identities and sexuality and sexual expressions and all this. And so, I mean, I think for us, it wasn't like, I guess it was almost like we had wished, how do I say this? It was like an acknowledgement of heteropatriarchy and of heteronormativity and transphobia and queerphobia in general, right? It's like, and misogyny. It's like men are, and especially it's so magnified with our communities, like Indigenous men are so afraid of platonic intimacy, of being cared for asking for help, like Coyote. I'm very much the same way, in that my father had severed ties from the family in a very ugly way. And I mean, he's no longer with us, but how that had severed this like connection with the rest of my family. And like, it really blew up a lot of connections that could have been had, or, you know, and so I guess it was kind of acknowledging that the sort of like trope of Indigenous masculinities of being like this warrior spirit, or, you know, the stoic Indian kind of thing. And we're just like, why can't men be intimate, and why can't they ask for help? Because, you know, there's so much, I mean, listen, I'm not saying that I'm not saying that cis gender men are, you know, the most, how do I say this? Like, they're not the most oppressed, right? But I think it is worth acknowledging like this idea of like gender spectrum, and just like the harm that white supremacy and all of its colonial, like systems of oppression that colonialism has brought in, and how much damage it has done for the cis men in our lives, but also how that reflects the harm that they now cause to spirit and to women and trans and queer folks within our communities, right? There's so much to say about it, but I could totally go on.
I just wanted to comment when you were bringing up, because I would love to see the films that you had in the Two Spirit film like showcase. But there's this film I saw at the LA Skins Fest, which is a native film festival here in Tovangar, that actually has to do with that. It's called Two Bears, and has to do with like a native dad struggle to kind of like show up for his daughter that he wasn't like. And watching that, I started like crying so much, because I could see so much of like the humanity in my like own father, but knowing like the structures around that makes it. So yeah, no, I think it's so important when you touch on, that's a whole talk on itself. But like it's really important in you know, like within our community spaces, of really understanding the ways that like what these like structures have like caused harm, that like create cycles that are like inter-community harm, that like is really hard to talk about.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just like to kind of wrap things up, one of kind of my final questions is how, going back to like the concept of what we were talking about in the beginning of this kind of garnered towards us as Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer artists and curators. I'm wondering how you find your art intersecting these identities of Indigenous and queer, especially because there's not a lot of representation for us.
Okay. Thank you. You know, I think it's just so inherently, it's in everything that I do, right? It's sort of like you can't separate it from your work, like as a queer Indigenous person or a Two-Spirit person, right? Within my work, like I have a beautiful collaborative relationship with Two-Spirit Métis Soto Polish artist Dana Danger, and so you've perhaps have seen my naked body on the 2017 Kinship issue of Canadian Art, because that was photographed by Dana. And so, I mean, everybody's now seen my naked body. So funny, and that was actually guest edited by Yaz Morgan. So, I mean, you could just kind of see the ways that, you know, we kind of bring in people and we end up establishing these lifelong committed relationships. And there's, you know, within that, you know, there are going to be mistakes, and there's always room for repair, and there's patience, you know, and it's really beautiful, like this kind of commitment that we've made to, you know, working together, but also, you know, I sleep in Dana's bed every time I'm in Montreal, and they stay with me, and like there are these kind of moments that are intimate. I don't even want to say platonic, because they're romantic. Like I'm so in love with my kin, and that it's like, for us, it's not just a working relationship. It's like really, it is like building a community and a network of like survival and understanding and like profound, like such a profound spiritual level, just like a love and bonding relationship. So yeah.
Oh, that made me so happy to hear. Yeah, I think that a lot of the intersections of like queerness and indigeneity within art practices really comes from like, yeah, these like collaborations like you're talking about, but also that like growing love that like is so deep. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like something I want to share on intersections of um like indigeneity and queerness, especially with art intersections. I feel like and I was reading one of the questions, and I feel like this kind of goes into that, but they're talking Hans says about queer theory and queer futures often reject lineage and family as these are normative structures, yet Indigenous Futurisms embrace kinship and ancestry, and seeing how that like ties together in like our work. There's something that like I really want to learn more screenwriting after doing the project with my wife who went to school for screenwriting, and something that's like a story that I really want to tell, especially thinking about like storytelling as a part in like our blood and our DNA as like Indigiqueer people. But I really want to do something on specifically like T for T trans pregnancy or like trans pregnancy, but with a two-spirit couple. It's kind of inspired by my friends that are both two-spirit, that one's like a two-spirit trans woman, other person's a trans man, and they had like a kid recently. And I really wanted to do this film that had to do with like kind of like myself having like a child with like another two-spirit person. In the film, I'm grappling with like the relationship with my body, like dysphoria stuff, but also like this really recognizing like the gift and the joy that is with the love I share with like my partner, and also the I feel like this is a common experience for like a lot of Native folks for us, of like uh especially people of all genders that can like become pregnant, of that relationship with like having our own like extended kin, especially because of like very violent medical structures. But something I really wanted to explore in this film is this recognition of like my partner and I in the films like gifts as two-spirit people, like the way that in like even like like spiritual gifts, like the when I was talking about dream medicine earlier. But for myself, as someone who has been in the really violent medical system and inpatient care, and I know so many friends of mine that are two-spirit that dealt with inpatient care with like psychosis and everything, I wanted to do this film where the kid that I have in the film with like my trans partner, we like teach our kid about like the beauty of like their gifts, but also recognizing that we're like in a society that for people that experience the world like that do feel hunted. I see this like beginning scene where like I'm just thinking about my friend who's like a Yupik trans woman who's a loved one of mine in Alaska. And I just see like a scene of us teaching our kid how to like hunt their own food, and like really sweet, like but the conversation I see having with the kid about being like, look, like I know not everyone will understand this, but there's like so much that's put into your art, or like the way that you talk to people is like so empathetic and caring and loving. Like it's all that I wish that I could say to my younger self when I was going through that, and to really unpack and undo a lot of the medical shame and trauma of that. So yeah, just thinking about like Indigenous relationships of like queerness, and also just like trans family systems.
That, if I can totally add to that, Coyote, that's like such a common narrative that I found in a lot of ceremonial circles that I've been a part of. And I can't remember who came up with this term, but like bioessentialism, which is basically like that whole, you know, like life giver kind of narrative that is just like, does not, I think, fit a lot of two-spirit folks and queer folks, right? Like that's just not something I'm interested in particular, but when I think about like family, or when I think about like kinship is like such an important or integral part like of my life, but not necessarily like, you know, not even say like my biological family, because I love them, but they're very much influenced by Christianity, as a lot of our families are. But recently I've been very involved with the Two-Spirit community here in Winnipeg, and just recently a couple of our elders have bought land, and we have our first Two-Spirit Sundance coming up next summer, which is really a beautiful thing to be a part of. So I guess I think about like, yeah, chosen family, and you know, where in fact your body or spirit feels safe in these ceremonial circles too, right?
Yeah, I think that kind of touched upon one of the questions that we had from the audience, but if it didn't, please let me know. I just wanted to thank you both so much for such a beautiful discussion. You're both so warm and welcoming, and have so much to say about, I could talk to you for hours, honestly. I wanted to open it up for anyone else in the audience who wanted to ask any questions, or if there's anything else that the both of you would like to share about your work or your practice, or any upcoming projects that you have as well.
Okay.
No, you go first. You go first, Coyote.
I was just gonna make a joke of me talking about like all of these like works in progress right now on my end, because I think it's a very Aquarius thing for me to be like, here's the like 10,000 ideas and like concepts that are in the process, which is why it was cool to talk about the solo show and the Behind Shut Eyes book being published, because me recognizing, wow, I can have things that feel like at least more like complete that are out there. But yeah, I think that like most, are we just doing kind of like closing sentiment now? Okay. Most of like the work that I'm doing can be found on my socials. I feel like, as my friends tease me, I'm overly active on socials. So my Instagram's just my name. It's Coyote Park. I do not keep my website as updated as it needs to be. And yeah, I think like just looking out for Destiny and Sedona, which is the film my wife and I are working on. We're starting our Kickstarter in January, which we're doing like a little Kickstarter video with the whole cast. That's like we're talking in the video like what queer utopia like means to us. And I'm just reading the comments right now to see too. Oh yeah, I can put all, okay, awesome. I was gonna put the info in, but yeah, that's something that I feel like we need like as much like community support as possible. And also just something that feels like I don't know. I like got so emotional talking about this project when I first started thinking about it with my partner. So I was like, this is what I needed. Like, this is something that like I really hope to reach other Kitty BIPOC folks that need is like, I love Brokeback Mountain, but I do not relate to cis white gay men. So this is kind of like our rendition of that, but you know, just showing how is like queer longing and yearning shown. Yeah. Anyways, that's what I'm up to, and you can see next. And if you're in Tovangar, there's going to be another Alejandro next month on the 12th of January. Yeah.
Damn, I'm gonna have to make it out there.
Yeah, same. I'm like, interesting.
I could always bring that.
Yeah. Well, the tips pay for a flight because I will totally do it. Oh no, I'm just kidding. I mean, I will totally do it. But what I'm working on, honestly, I'm just trudging through the last bit of my coursework for my PhD, which I'm kind of at the tail end of my coursework now and going into my candidacy exams and studying for that. So it's very much on the forefront of what I'm doing. But yeah, I don't know. I have a show coming up with Yaz because I apparently only have collaborative curatorial projects. I don't like to work alone, but we have one coming up in Peterborough in Toronto called Kink, but it's like kin with a bracket K. And so we have works by, you know what, that's in the works, but I believe it's Ariel Twist. We have Dana Danger. We have Lacey Burning. Who am I forgetting? Kabluziak, I believe. Anyway, so, but it's kind of all involving like this idea of reciprocity and consent and the BDSM culture, right? And how those are so inherent, or like that consent is so intrinsically or should be tied into BDSM culture, right? And just how we can identify with that as queer and two-spirit Indigenous folks, right? Because it also feels like with BDSM and with play, like they're often such white dominated and cis spaces. So it's kind of nice to have a show that maybe reflects what we like to see. And I think that's it. That's kind of all I'm working on so far. Yeah. Follow me on Instagram. I post poll videos all the time. I don't know.
I love that concept of collaborating kind of with the same people over and over. My friends and I in the trans-led organism that Angela mentioned earlier, Lightning Rod, we joke that we constantly work with each other because we just can't get enough of each other. We want to see each other all the time. Because then it never really feels like work. It just feels like you're learning and growing with your like community and your friends. So I think that's really special. And I'm glad that we all kind of share that intimacy with the people that we love. Yeah, again, such a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much. Much love to both of you. I hope everyone has a great night. Thank you so much for joining us. Take care.
Miigwech, thank you so much. Such a pleasure.
Woklo, thank you.
Okay, bye.